Racist cop corners black woman unaware. The judge above him answers directly to her true identity. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. Maria Johnson sat quietly in the courtroom, her gaze steady and calm. She wore the air of someone who had been through countless battles, yet none had ever shaken her resolve. The case that had brought her here today was just another in a long line of injustices she had spent years fighting against. But today, it felt different. Today, Maria's patience would be tested in a way she had never expected. The room buzzed with hushed whispers as the prosecutor laid out his case. But Maria wasn't listening to the words. She was focused on the man in the back of the room, Officer John Thompson. His uniform was crisp, his posture rigid, but there was something in his eyes that made Maria uneasy. She had seen this before. Men like him, with their dismissive attitude, their judgmental stares. He was the kind of officer who believed the law applied to everyone except him. And today, he was about to make a very costly mistake. As the courtroom proceedings continued, Maria kept her eyes on Officer Thompson, noting the way he seemed to scoff at the defendant, a black woman who had already been judged in his mind before she even spoke. He leaned back in his chair, looking over at the defense attorney with an air of superiority. His laughter rang out, a low, mocking sound that made Maria's jaw tighten. But still she said nothing. She simply waited. As the judge called for a short recess, Maria stood and walked toward the hallway, her heels clicking on the polished marble floors. She could feel Thompson's gaze on her, burning with arrogance, as though she didn't belong in this space. His assumptions were about to be shattered. Maria stepped into the hallway and made a call. Her voice was steady, her words clipped. She didn't need to say much, just a few words to confirm what she already knew. The judge would be in for a shock when the session resumed. When Maria returned to the courtroom, she did so with the quiet confidence of someone who had already won. The moment she re-entered the room, all eyes turned toward her. The judge, a middle-aged man with a carefully cultivated sense of impartiality, barely glanced at her. Officer Thompson, however, seemed to notice something about her that made his smug expression falter for the briefest moment. He didn't know it yet, but the woman he had so arrogantly mocked was no ordinary witness. Maria Johnson wasn't just some bystander. She wasn't a victim of his prejudice. She wasn't just a black woman who had walked into the courtroom that day. She was the judge's superior, an undercover federal judge who had been watching Thompson for months. With a single look, Maria revealed her true identity. The air in the courtroom went still. Thompson's face drained of color as the realization dawned on him. The power he thought he wielded in this room, the authority he took for granted, was nothing compared to what Maria held. The judge's hand trembled as he reached for his gavel, trying to regain control of the room. But it was too late. Maria had already taken control. She stood tall, her posture unwavering, and delivered the verdict. Thompson's reign of arrogance was over. The courtroom, once full of whispers and judgment, was now filled with the sound of justice being served. As the moments passed, the courtroom seemed to hang in suspended animation. The air was thick with tension, a palpable weight settling on every shoulder. Officer John Thompson stood frozen, his face ashen, as the reality of Maria Johnson's identity settled in. He had no idea what hit him. He had been the embodiment of arrogance, assuming his position was unshakable. He was a man of authority, a man who believed that his uniform would always protect him from the consequences of his actions. But now, standing before him, was the woman he had so carelessly belittled, the woman who held the power to bring his world crashing down. Maria's expression was calm, as though she had expected this moment to come. She had been ready for it long before she had stepped foot in the courtroom that morning. She had known that someone like Thompson, someone who used their badge as a shield to hide their prejudice, would eventually show their true colors. And when he did, It would be her duty to ensure he faced the consequences. The judge, still trying to regain control, cleared his throat awkwardly. He glanced at Maria, clearly rattled by the revelation. The room had grown eerily silent, every pair of eyes now fixed on the woman who had just revealed herself as more than just a passive observer in the courtroom. She was the force of justice that was about to topple everything Thompson believed in. Maria took a deep breath, her voice steady and clear as she addressed the room. I believe we have seen enough here today. Officer Thompson, your actions have not gone unnoticed. I'm sure you're well aware that your behavior is not only unethical, but also unlawful. You will be held accountable for your actions, as will those who have aided in perpetuating the culture of disrespect in this room. The words hung in the air, sharp and unwavering. Maria's gaze never wavered as she looked at Thompson, her eyes cold, but there was something else there too, a deep, unspoken understanding. She had fought too hard to get where she was to allow anyone to diminish her worth, let alone a man like him. The room remained silent as the weight of her words settled on everyone present. Even the judge, who had initially seemed indifferent, looked uncomfortable as he realized the gravity of the situation. This was no longer a simple case. It had become a turning point, a moment where the true meaning of justice would be tested. Thompson finally found his voice, his words stumbling as he tried to regain some semblance of dignity. I didn't know who you were. I had no idea. His voice was small now, a far cry from the confidence he had exuded moments ago. Maria didn't respond immediately. She allowed his words to hang in the air, allowing them to sink in. She wasn't interested in excuses. This wasn't about him. It was about the message that needed to be sent. Ignorance, she finally said, her tone icy, does not excuse behavior that undermines the very foundation of the justice system. You will face the consequences of your actions, and you will do so knowing that this was entirely within your control. The judge, realizing the shift in power, cleared his throat once again and attempted to speak, but Maria cut him off. I've already spoken, she said. The law will do its part now. With those words, Maria turned on her heel and made her way toward the door, her every step carrying the weight of authority. As she exited the courtroom, the murmurs behind her grew louder. The world outside had shifted, and for Officer Thompson, nothing would ever be the same again. Maria Johnson sat in her office, the weight of the day's events still heavy on her shoulders. The courthouse had emptied out after the dramatic revelation, but the impact of what had just transpired lingered in the air. She could feel the eyes of the legal world upon her now, and that was exactly what she wanted. She had always believed in the law, in fairness, and in the power of justice. But today, she had seen firsthand how deep-rooted the biases of those who were supposed to uphold the law could be. Officer Thompson had believed his uniform would protect him, that would shield him from accountability. But Maria knew better. It wasn't the uniform that commanded respect. It was the actions, the integrity, and the commitment to what was right that earned it. Maria had spent years in the legal system, watching as powerful people exploited their positions to maintain control. She had seen the way corrupt officers and politicians twisted the law for their own gain. And for every one of those corrupt individuals, there were countless victims, people who were forgotten, overlooked, or silenced. That was the world Maria had dedicated her life to changing. She had never been one to let injustice slide. But today, as she sat in her office, reflecting on her actions, she knew that the battle was far from over. This was just one victory, one moment in time where justice had prevailed. But there were still so many battles left to fight. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. She looked down at the screen and saw a message from her colleague, Judge Evans. Maria, we need to talk. Meet me in my office. Maria sighed, knowing exactly what this was about. She had expected this. She had expected the backlash, the whispers behind her back, the questioning of her methods. But she wasn't afraid. She wasn't backing down. The legal system had to change, and she was the one who was going to make sure it did. She grabbed her coat and walked out of her office, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. As she entered Judge Evans's office, he looked up from his desk, his face stern. Maria, what you did today, It was bold, but it was also dangerous. You've exposed us all to scrutiny. People are going to start asking questions. We can't afford to make waves like this. Maria stood tall, her gaze unwavering. We've been hiding behind the illusion of justice for too long. We've been letting people like Thompson get away with their actions because we're too afraid to confront the system. But that ends today. This is bigger than one case. It's about accountability, and it's about making sure that no one, no matter their position, feels they're above the law. Judge Evans leaned back in his chair, studying her. I get it, Maria, but there are consequences to taking this kind of stand. People in power don't like being challenged. You need to be careful. Maria shook her head. I've spent my life playing it safe, doing what I was told, following the rules. And look where that got us. It's time for change, and I'm not afraid to make the sacrifices necessary to get it. The judge sighed, his expression softening. You're right, but be prepared. There will be those who fight back, and they will fight dirty. Maria nodded. I'm ready for it. As she left the judge's office, she felt a sense of purpose settling in her chest. This was just the beginning. She had started a fire, and she wouldn't stop until it burned through the system, exposing all the corruption, the injustice, and the prejudice that had been allowed to fester for far too long. The battle for justice wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. But Maria Johnson was in it for the long haul. She wasn't just a judge. She was a force to be reckoned with, and nothing was going to stand in her way. Maria Johnson woke up the next morning with a clear purpose in her mind. The events of the previous day had not been forgotten, but they had solidified her resolve. She had made a decision to fight not only for her own position, but for the entire system that had allowed corruption and prejudice to thrive for far too long. The shockwave caused by her revelation in the courtroom was still rippling through the legal community. But Maria knew that this was just the beginning. As she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blazer and running a hand through her hair, she thought about what lay ahead. She had made a powerful enemy in Officer John Thompson, but she was more concerned about the larger system. The people who had stood by, silent and complicit in the corruption, were just as dangerous. It was time to go beyond just taking down one officer. She needed to expose the entire network. Maria made her way to her office, her mind racing with plans and strategies. When she arrived, her assistant handed her a stack of files. These came in this morning, Judge Johnson, her assistant said, offering her a small smile. Maria nodded and took the papers, her fingers skimming through them quickly. There was a new case to review, but something else caught her eye. A report on internal investigations within the police department, specifically focusing on misconduct and abuse of power. Maria set the papers aside for a moment and dialed her phone. Hello, this is Maria Johnson. I need to see everything you have on Officer Thompson's case, along with any complaints filed against other officers involved in this investigation. Yes, I want all the details, nothing redacted. Her voice was calm but firm, a reminder to those on the other end that this was no longer a simple matter of protocol. The investigation into Officer Thompson had just expanded. Maria was no longer waiting for justice to come to her. She was going to drag it out of the system, piece by piece. The phone call ended, and Maria turned her attention back to the files. As she flipped through them, she felt a growing sense of urgency. She was beginning to uncover a pattern, a history of misconduct that went beyond Thompson. Officers, judges, and other officials have been turning a blind eye to the system's flaws for years. It was a network of corruption that was so deeply ingrained that the truth had been buried under layers of bureaucracy. Maria had seen it all before, but never so clearly. She realized she had to move quickly. The longer she waited, the more the system would close ranks to protect itself. Maria's thoughts were interrupted by another call. This time, it was Judge Evans again. Maria, we need to talk about how to handle this situation, the judge said, his voice tinged with concern. There are whispers. People are nervous. Maria listened quietly as Evans outlined his concerns. We can't afford to let this escalate. The last thing we need is for this to spill over into the media. Maria's expression remained unchanged. It's already spilling over. The truth is already out, Judge. The only thing we can do now is make sure it's heard all the way to the top. She hung up the phone and stood up, determination setting in. The fight had just begun, and she was ready for it. Maria knew that exposing corruption was never easy. But she was no stranger to hard work, to the grind of fighting for what was right even when the odds were stacked against her. And she wasn't about to stop now. As the days passed, Maria worked tirelessly. She sifted through files, interviewed witnesses, and connected the dots between the players in the corrupt network. Her phone rang constantly with updates, but she remained focused on her goal, justice. She could feel the pressure mounting. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became. But Maria didn't flinch. She was on the edge of something big, and she wasn't going to back down. By the time she was ready to present her findings, she knew that nothing would be the same. The system was about to be exposed, and she was the one who was going to make it happen. The days following Maria's discovery were filled with tension. She knew that she was on the verge of something monumental, but the more she uncovered, the more the risks piled up. Every meeting, every phone call felt like walking a tightrope. She had managed to uncover documents that connected Officer Thompson to a series of shady dealings and corruption within the police department. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized that the rot went further than she had imagined. There were judges, other officers, and even some members of the local government who were involved. It was a web of corruption that had been carefully woven over years, and Maria was determined to unravel it all. Maria sat in her office late one evening, flipping through more files. Her eyes were tired, but her determination was unwavering. She had put together a detailed report of her findings, and she was ready to take the next step. She called her trusted colleague, Detective Sarah Martinez, who had been helping her with the investigation. "Sarah, it's time. We have everything we need," Maria said, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "Meet me at the office tomorrow morning. We'll go over the details and figure out how we're going to present this." The next morning, Sarah arrived early, as always, and they began to go over the evidence. Maria had pieced together a case that was airtight, a series of actions and cover-ups that spanned across multiple cases. As they reviewed the evidence, Maria's mind raced through the possibilities. She knew they had to be careful. The people involved in this corruption would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Maria took a deep breath and looked at Sarah. This isn't just about Officer Thompson anymore. This is about the entire system. If we go public with this, we need to be ready for the backlash. But if we don't, nothing will change. We'll be complicit in all of this. Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "I understand, Maria. We've come this far. There's no turning back now." Maria closed the folder in front of her and stood up, her resolve stronger than ever. "We do this right. We go to the authorities first, we follow the proper channels, and then we go public if we have to. But we need to be smart about it. We can't let them control the narrative." They spent the rest of the morning drafting a plan. Maria knew the risks. Exposing corruption on this scale would undoubtedly make her enemies, but it was a risk she was willing to take. As the day wore on, Maria felt the pressure mounting. She could sense that the clock was ticking, that every second they delayed gave the corrupt officials a chance to cover their tracks. But she remained calm. She had been preparing for this moment for years. Finally, after hours of planning, Maria made the call. She sent the report to the Internal Affairs Department, marking it as urgent. "It's done," she said quietly, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've done everything we can. Now we wait." Maria knew that the waiting was the hardest part. They had done their part, but now the investigation was out of their hands. The real battle was about to begin. In the days that followed, Maria remained on edge. She kept a low profile, knowing that the people she had just exposed would not take kindly to the revelation. But she also knew that this was bigger than her. It wasn't just about one officer or one corrupt judge. It was about a system that had failed for far too long, and she wasn't going to let it continue unchecked. As she walked into the courthouse the following week, she could feel the weight of the eyes on her. Whispers followed her down the hall, but Maria walked with her head held high. She had nothing to hide. The truth was on her side, and she was prepared to face whatever came next. She had made her stand, and now it was time for the system to answer for its crimes. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but Maria's resolve remained firm. She had exposed the corruption within the system, and now the storm was beginning to pick up. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she had taken the first step, and there was no going back. The investigation was underway, but Maria could feel the pressure building. People in power were starting to take notice of her actions, and she could see the wheels of the system beginning to turn against her. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Conversations paused when she entered a room, but she remained unfazed, her mind focused on the mission at hand. Maria's phone rang early one morning. It was Sarah. "Maria, we need to talk," Sarah said, her voice tight with urgency. "They're starting to close ranks. I've received word that some of the officers are trying to discredit the evidence you've uncovered. They're spinning it, trying to turn the narrative against us." Maria's eyes narrowed. She had expected this. The system would always protect its own, but she had made a promise to herself, and she wasn't going to back down now. "What are they saying?" Maria asked, her voice calm, but with an edge of determination. "They're questioning the validity of the documents you submitted. They're claiming that they were fabricated, that they don't hold water," Sarah explained. Maria took a deep breath, steadying herself. "They can question all they want, but the truth is on our side. We've followed every step, documented everything. This won't work. We can't let them take control of the narrative." Maria's voice was resolute, and Sarah could hear the confidence in it. "I'll make sure the evidence is locked down. We won't let them take us down." Maria knew this was just the beginning. The fight for justice was never going to be easy, especially when those in power had so much to lose. But she wasn't afraid of a fight. Maria had spent years in the trenches, watching as the system turned a blind eye to the people it was meant to protect. She wasn't going to let that continue. As the investigation unfolded, the pressure mounted. Maria found herself working late into the night, sorting through files, attending meetings, and making calls. It was a relentless pace, but she was fueled by something stronger than fatigue, her belief in what she was doing. She believed in justice. She believed in the power of truth to bring about change. The weeks passed, and the investigation began to reveal even more troubling details. More officers were implicated, more judges were involved, and the extent of the corruption was beginning to unfold in a way Maria had never imagined. But with each revelation, Maria's resolve grew stronger. She knew that this was bigger than just exposing a few bad actors. This was about holding the entire system accountable for its failures. Maria didn't sleep much. She barely had time for herself, but that didn't matter. She had one goal in mind: to ensure that the system was held accountable, no matter the cost. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah. "The evidence is ready for the next phase. We need to present it to the public. It's time to go on the offensive." Maria stood up from her desk, looking out the window. The city was quiet, but she could feel the storm brewing. The fight was about to become public, and once it did, there was no turning back. She gathered her things and made her way to the press conference she had scheduled. Maria was about to make her move. The world was about to know the truth. She had prepared herself for this moment for months, and now, as she stood before the cameras, she felt a rush of determination. This was her moment to bring the system down. She wasn't going to let it slip away. The press conference was set. Maria stood backstage, a sense of calm settling over her despite the storm brewing in her chest. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she would expose the truth to the world. She had prepared for every angle, every question, and every challenge that might come her way. Her team had worked tirelessly, cross-referencing every document, verifying every piece of evidence. This wasn't just about making headlines. It was about making sure the system was held accountable. As Maria stepped onto the stage, the bright lights of the cameras felt almost blinding, but she didn't flinch. She had faced tougher situations in her career, but none had felt as significant as this. The room fell silent, the reporters waiting for her to speak. She took a deep breath and looked into the crowd. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I am here to speak the truth. What I am about to reveal is not easy, but it is necessary. For too long, Corruption has been allowed to fester within our justice system. People have used their positions of power to manipulate, exploit, and oppress. The room remained quiet, all eyes fixed on her as she continued. I've spent months uncovering the evidence, documenting the crimes, and exposing the truth. What I have found is a network of corruption that goes far beyond one officer, one judge, or one case. It is a system that has failed those it was supposed to protect, and it is a system that must be changed. Maria paused, her gaze sweeping over the room. She could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes of the world on her. I am not here to tear down the law or destroy our justice system. I am here to make it better, to ensure that everyone, regardless of their position, is held to the same standards. I have worked within this system for years. I believe in justice, in fairness, and in the law. But I cannot stand by and watch as it continues. To protect those who abuse their power. Maria's voice was unwavering, the conviction in her words carrying across the room. Today, I am releasing a report. The evidence is irrefutable. Officers, judges, and public officials have been involved in a cover-up that goes back years. It's time for them to face the consequences of their actions. It's time for this system to change. As Maria finished her statement, she felt a shift in the room. The reporters' pens flew across their notebooks, the air buzzing with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. But Maria knew that this was just the beginning. The real work was about to start. The investigation would go public, and with it, the fight to ensure justice prevailed. But Maria wasn't afraid. She had made her stand, and now the system would have to answer. As she left the stage, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Sarah. It's starting. They're already scrambling to cover their tracks. Stay alert. Maria smiled to herself, knowing that the battle was far from over. But she was ready. She had always been ready. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. The corrupt system Maria had uncovered was on the brink of collapsing, and she was the one who had pushed it to the edge. The days after the press conference passed in a blur of activity. Maria knew that releasing the report was just the beginning of a much larger battle. As expected, the system fought back. There were leaks to the press, attempts to discredit the evidence, and whispers of retaliation. But Maria had anticipated this. She knew that exposing the truth would stir up a hornet's nest, but she had prepared herself for the fallout. She had always been a strategist, and this moment was no different. With every new attempt to cover up the corruption, Maria grew more determined to see it through. She worked closely with her team, making sure the evidence was airtight and the public narrative was controlled. The media coverage was intense, but Maria remained calm, her eyes always on the bigger picture. As the investigation expanded, more whistleblowers came forward, some anonymously, others in person. They confirmed Maria's findings, adding more weight to the case. Officers, once untouchable in their power, were now being questioned, their actions scrutinized under the public's watchful eye. The walls of the system, once so solid and impenetrable, were starting to crumble. But with every step forward, Maria felt the pressure mounting. The people in power were not going to give up without a fight. Maria was contacted by several colleagues, some offering support, others urging her to back off. Maria, you made your point. You exposed them. Don't risk everything for a fight you can't win, one of her close friends advised. But Maria knew that this wasn't about her. It was about the future of the system, the future of justice. I'm not backing down, she said firmly, her voice unwavering. If we stop now, nothing will change. The same people who've been allowed to operate with impunity will keep doing so. I can't live with that. In the weeks that followed, Maria's office became a hub of activity. She received hundreds of calls, meeting with lawyers, journalists, and activists who were all eager to join her cause. She could see the momentum building, but she also knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. The legal battles were just beginning, and the people in power were going to fight with everything they had. As the pressure increased, so did the threats. Maria received several anonymous messages, some warning her to stop, others more direct, threatening her career, her safety, even her family. But she didn't flinch. She had made a promise to herself, and nothing would make her break it. They could try to intimidate me, but it won't work, she told Sarah, who had become her closest ally throughout this ordeal. We're not backing down. The investigation was reaching its peak, and Maria could feel the turning point approaching. It wasn't just about the corruption within the police force anymore. It had become a symbol of the larger battle for justice, accountability, and transparency. The system that had failed so many for so long was finally being held accountable. Maria knew that this battle would not be won overnight. There would be setbacks, delays, and more attempts to derail the progress they had made. But she was prepared for all of it. She had come too far to turn back now. As she stood before a judge in a key hearing, watching as the evidence was laid out for all to see, Maria felt a quiet satisfaction. The fight wasn't over, but they had taken a critical step forward. The walls of corruption were starting to crumble, and Maria was determined to keep pushing until the very last one fell. The months that followed were a whirlwind of legal challenges and public scrutiny. Maria had known that exposing corruption at this level would not come without consequences, but she was ready. Each day, the stakes grew higher as the investigation moved forward, with more powerful figures being implicated. She spent countless hours in meetings, reviewing documents, and strategizing her next moves. The pressure weighed heavily on her, but Maria was fueled by something stronger than fear. She was fueled by justice. Her team worked tirelessly, gathering testimony from whistleblowers, securing confidential documents, and pushing the investigation into new territory. As more people came forward, the walls around the corrupt officials began to crack. Yet, despite the progress, Maria knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The system was fighting back, and the closer they got to the truth, the more resistance they faced. They had started to notice subtle attempts to undermine the investigation. Information was being leaked, evidence was going missing, and key witnesses were being intimidated. But Maria was unshaken. She had made a commitment to see this through, no matter the cost. One evening, as Maria sat alone in her office, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. The breakthrough we've been waiting for is finally here. The judge who was part of the cover-up is ready to testify. This could change everything. Maria's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment they had been working toward. The judge, a pivotal figure in the corruption they had uncovered, had finally agreed to come forward. Maria knew that his testimony could be the final piece of the puzzle. It was time to act. The next day, Maria and her team went to work, preparing for the hearing. The pressure was immense, but Maria remained focused. This was more than just a legal battle. It was a battle for the soul of the justice system. She couldn't afford to let this slip away. As the day of the hearing approached, Maria could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment that could reshape everything. When she entered the courtroom, she could feel the eyes of the world on her. The reporters, the judges, the officers, everyone was watching. The room was heavy with anticipation. Maria took a deep breath, her confidence unwavering. The judge walked into the room, his face betraying no emotion, but Maria could sense his discomfort. He knew what was coming. As he took the stand, Maria could see the tension in his shoulders. For years, he had been part of the corrupt network that had run unchecked. But now, the truth was coming to light. The questions began, and the judge's voice wavered as he spoke. The weight of his actions was finally catching up with him. Maria listened intently, watching as the judge's defense crumbled under the weight of his own lies. Piece by piece, the case that had been carefully built over months came together. The corruption that had once seemed impenetrable was being exposed for all to see. As the judge's testimony came to a close, Maria knew they had done it. The tide had turned. The corrupt system that had protected the guilty for so long was now facing its reckoning. The room erupted in murmurs, and Maria allowed herself a brief moment of quiet triumph. But there was no time to celebrate. Not yet. The fight was far from over. As the days passed, the investigation continued to unfold, and Maria could see the momentum building. More arrests were made, more officials were implicated, and the public began to demand accountability. The system was changing piece by piece. Maria knew that this battle would not be over until the final act was played out in court. But she had come too far to back down now. She had fought for justice, and she had won the first battle. The rest would come in time. With every step, Maria's confidence grew. She had made her stand, and she would not rest until the entire system was held accountable. She had started a revolution, and there was no turning back.